It is February 24th, 2025. One night prior, in Minnesota, the Timberwolves had lost to the Thunder in a narrow game. But these two teams are on a back-to-back, and this time they're going over to OKC. And in this game, for all the flaws that the Timberwolves had, they would go on to have the largest comeback in franchise history. And with their resilience, kind of show that this is a team that, come playoff time, no matter what their regular season record might be, it's a team you don't want to face. And certainly a team that's going to keep a lot of series interesting. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts, and today you cannot count out the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, to begin contextualizing this team, you have to start with a man up front, and that is, of course, Anthony Edwards. And not only is he the go-to option for this team, but he's also a very high-level defender and a great playoff riser. And so with that, if he's having an off night offensively like he was in this past game, he's able to make up for it a little bit with the other stuff that he's able to provide for you. In this game against the Thunder, late in it goes to overtime, he gets the game-sealing block against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And if you look at a more one-dimensional player, they're not going to be able to make that play. And that was the play that really iced the game for the Minnesota Timberwolves. It would have, I believe, put the Thunder ahead. And that block, more than any shot could be, was the dagger that really put the OKC Thunder away. And even after that play, the Timberwolves go up to the line and take a couple free throws, and that ends up making a 3-point game. So technically, it's still in reach for the Thunder with 6 seconds left. But what that block does as well is it kind of affects your momentum, especially with the way that the fourth quarter of this game went, where the Wolves go on a 16-0 run, end up taking the game to overtime after being down by 25 points at one point. And now they block your star player, and they just have to take a couple of free throws. It's going to be a 3-point game. Best you can do is tie. That block really sets the tone that this game is not going to go in your favor more than likely. And so everything Anthony Edwards is able to do, you take a look at an offensive engine and say Luka Doncic. Now, I'm not arguing that Ant is a better player than Luka by any means. But if Luka's having an off night offensively, it's a little bit harder for him to impact the game at a high level because he's not the greatest defender in the world, right? But if you're able to be a threat on both ends of the court, then that opens up your ability to an entirely different level. Because say you're having a bad night offensively like Ant was, if you can still come up on the defensive end, then you can still be a valuable, impactful player to your team. And that's what really separates a superstar from someone like D'Angelo Russell, for example, who, if he's having a bad night offensively, he can't do a lot for you just because of his lack of defense. And it really separates the good players from the great players, from the perennial All-Stars, perennial All-NBA level guys. And then with the loss of Karl-Anthony Towns, of course, Ant has truly become the leader of this team. Because even with Cat there, he was the number one option. However, it was a little bit closer. You have one of the most talented big men of all time, one of the best shooting bigs that we've ever seen. So, he's still going to get a lot of opportunity, right? But this season, Anthony Edwards is certifiably the guy for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he's not just showing up on defense, but he is, for the most part, this season showing up on offense too. A 27-point-per-game scorer. It's something that's really the mark of a good leader, is that he's done what this team needs him to do. This is a team that, with the loss of Cat, he was a big part of their spacing. And so with that, there's a little bit less of shooting potential on this team. And with that, Anthony Edwards has taken the initiative to be more of the threat from beyond the arc this year. And sure, sometimes there was more volatility with that night in, night out. But overall, it's what this team needed. And so with Ant taking a high volume of threes, that's really something I love to see in a leader of a team, is doing whatever Minnesota needs to win. It just kind of shows that drive to compete. And then that brings me to my last point about Ant, and that ties in with that drive as well. And that is how he performs in the playoffs. Now, he's a good regular season player. Do not get me wrong. He's an all-star, one of the best shooting guards in the entire NBA. But come playoff time, he rises to another level. And last year, the Timberwolves had their best season since the Kevin Garnett era. And they would ultimately go on to lose to Dallas, who would go on to lose to the Celtics in the finals. And this was a team that had pretty high expectations going into the playoffs. They were the number 3 seed in the West. And so with that, of course, a Western Conference Finals appearance is very, very impressive. But I want to take a look at the year prior to that as well, where the Timberwolves had a lot more middle of the road record, and there weren't a lot of expectations for this team. And Anthony Edwards goes out, and this is a team that didn't go on to make much noise, but Anthony Edwards, what he really showed is that no matter the situation, he's a playoff riser, because his numbers went well up from the regular season. And actually watching games, he was clearly someone that was going out there and giving it his all, night in, night out. So, I'm arguably even more impressed by the year prior, where there were low expectations and it still balled out. But then you add on the Western Conference Finals run as well. It's been a very good playoff resume for Anthony Edwards, and every time he's been there, he's really showed up and showed out, even the year before that. So between his efforts on both the defensive end of the floor and the offensive end, doing whatever it takes, whatever the team needs to win, and his drive to compete in the playoffs especially, Anthony Edwards is the perfect man to lead the charge for the Timberwolves, and a major reason why you can't count them out. But then we get into the culture of this team, and that's something that I really want to highlight, because that's something that has kind of had to be rebuilt. Prior to the Rudy Gobert trade, the Minnesota Timberwolves had just made the playoffs, and it seemed kind of like a turning point for the franchise. You bring in Patrick Beverley, who, what he brings to you on the court necessarily isn't as special as what he does for the locker room. And you have some other scrappy defenders on the team like Jared Vanderbilt. And this is a team that felt like it was setting forth an identity of these young, scrappy defenders who are going to do everything they can, like almost a pack of wolves in a sense, kind of fitting in with the team mascot and all, that are going to do what it takes to win. They're going to be scrappy, they're going to fight, they're going to hustle, and they're going to play good defense. And there's a lot of switchability with it too, a Jaden McDaniels, a Vando, to be able to play multiple positions and have both the size and quickness to keep up with whatever position they need to be guarding, especially in the case of Jaden McDaniels. And then you go out and you add Rudy Gobert to the team. And on paper, this is a great defensive anchor, right? But it kind of took away from some of the culture of this team. You lost a guy like Vando, Patrick Beverley left, and all of a sudden this scrappy defensive identity that you had created wasn't necessarily there anymore. And more so, it became a defense that was kind of anchored around Rudy Gobert, and then you have everyone else. Jaden McDaniels still one of the best defenders in the entire NBA, but he was no longer the focal point of this defense, and it seemed to revolve more around Gobert. And ultimately, from the Pat Bev year to the year after that with Rudy Gobert, there wasn't much of a shift in the Timberwolves. They were arguably more disappointing relative to expectations. And then year 2 in Gobert, they start to work things out a little bit more. They got more chemistry, bringing in Mike Conley at the point guard position. And that goes on to work really well for them. And Jaden McDaniels makes an all-defensive team. Anthony Edwards continues to improve on that end. And Naz Reid, an offensive-minded big man, is also showing up and being a positive defender now, as well as Cat having arguably his best defensive year. And then you get to this season, and I see that culture, I see that defensive-minded, scrappy identity coming back for this team. I see that switchability. You look at it, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, one of the most underrated and underappreciated players in the entire NBA. Leonard Miller when he gets playtime. Even the Young Bucks like a Terrence Shannon Jr. and a Jalen Clark who started in this past game against the OKC Thunder. I see that defensive identity coming back, and you've still got Gobert to anchor that rim protection, but you're not solely reliant on Gobert as you were a couple years prior. And that really gets me excited about the potential of this team defensively. They were an all-time great defense last year, and now they seem even more dynamic, even if that's not showing up in the advanced stats. And in having a leader like Anthony Edwards who has that drive to compete, that drive to do whatever it takes to win, that allows your team to kind of rally around him. And he is a very vocal personality. And, in certain situations that if there is a rift between the organization and the roster, that can sometimes lead to a disconnect. But when things are going well, going smoothly on that end, it's a very good thing to have a vocal personality. And you saw in this past game, in the post game interview, Anthony Edwards was worried about hyping up a guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And that whole team showed up in that game. And Nas, relative to their standards, had relatively inefficient games. Guess what? Jaden McDaniels comes in with 27, my bad. And he's really turned the corner in these past couple of weeks. Terrence Shannon Jr. showed up. Jalen Clark showed up. This was a very good showing for the Timberwolves as a team, and it really showed their culture and their identity. It's coming back. This is a scrappy team that wants to win, led by a very confident, a very vocal personality that the team can rally behind, and that really gets them excited about the future of this team. And even right now, come the playoffs, we've talked about Ant being a playoff riser. Nas Reed stepping into that starting role in the absence of Julius Randle, he's shown up very, very well. And if given a big opportunity down the line, Julius Randle is a guy who's not known for performing well in the playoffs. So if they take the leash off of Nas Reed a little bit come playoff time, I think that he could do very, very well. Jaden McDaniels, he at times has not had the best showings offensively in the playoffs, but defensively he's going to be clamps night in, night out. And then Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who never gets the attention that he deserves, in the absence of Mike Conley for the Timberwolves due to injury last season in the playoffs, when Nickeil had to be starting point guard, he showed up very, very well for this team, both on offense and on defense. Correction, it wasn't the year last season where Nickeil started, but the year prior to that, where he showed up very, very well as a starter. But this team is one that, with their culture, with their identity of being this scrappy team that has come back, you can never truly count them out. And I think that was really on display in this past game. The largest comeback in franchise history. That doesn't happen by accident. They built a culture here in Minnesota, and they rally around their guy, Anthony Edwards, but they're ready to show up when given the opportunity. Jalen Clark had to step in. Nickeil Alexander-Walker had to step in. Nas Reed had to step in. They were missing 3 starters this game, but they still had the Thunder's number on the second half of a back-to-back, playing against an audience of one of the most passionate fan bases in the entire NBA. And the regular season hasn't gone as well as it did last year for the Timberwolves. Not as well as you might expect the way that I've been hyping them up. But this is a franchise that for so long has not experienced much success whatsoever. And if they even manage to make it to the playoffs in a year, they are hungry. And this current roster is absolutely that way. And with their competitiveness, with their drive, with their ability on both ends of the court, this team is going to be a very tough out. And from everything we've seen from them, they don't look like a championship level team this year necessarily. But we saw what the Heat did with their culture and everyone buying in, really overachieving in the Jimmy Butler era and going on a couple finals runs. I wouldn't be too surprised if that happened for Minnesota as well. This is a team with a great identity led by a very strong leader who is the perfect fit for this team and willing to do whatever they need. And I love to see that from a young leader. And that was really all on display in this past Monday game against the OKC Thunder. What a win it was for Minnesota in overtime. And even in inefficient games from Nas and Anthony Edwards, it really put on display all that this team has to offer. And that is all for today's episode of State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Thank you very, very much for listening. You cannot count the Minnesota Timberwolves out.